On this version of our podcast, we're going to look again into alternative versions of therapy for substance abuse and other issues. Today we're going to turn our attention to art therapy. This is something that's been of interest to me, and I'm happy to take a deeper look into this particular form of therapy. Those of you that have listened to these podcasts know that in a previous career incarnation, I worked in inpatient substance abuse programs. Both of the inpatient programs that I had the privilege of working in had art therapists, and was able to see what it is that they do and how it is that they go about accomplishing their goals. Today we're going to be joined by a friend of mine, Natalie Polakowski, who is an art therapist. We're going to ask her a little bit about what she does and how she does what she does and what kind of success that she sees. But let's first start with a definition. A definition, this comes from the American Art Therapy Association. They were founded in 1969, and they're one of the world's leading art therapy membership organizations. And so they define art therapy as this. Art therapy is an integrative mental health and human services profession that enriches the lives of individuals, families, and communities through active art making, creative process, applied psychological theory, and human experience within a psychotherapeutic relationship. Pretty concise, pretty to the point. They go on to say art therapy, facilitated by a professional art therapist, effectively supports personal and relational treatment goals as well as community concerns. Those are the things that we'll talk about when Natalie joins us. You know, we did a previous podcast on natural medicine, including acupuncture. If you haven't had a chance to listen to that, go back and listen to the conversation we had with Jamie Sabala. That was really interesting as well. We've talked in recent podcasts about opioids and marijuana and pain management and marijuana as possibly an alternative to opioids, all that sort of thing. Today we're going to talk about a different type of approach altogether with the art therapy. And I'm interested in how that might apply not only to substance use issues, but also things like dementia, possibly autism, other mental health disorders, trauma, that sort of thing. So I hope you enjoy our conversation. And as always, we'll invite you to give some feedback once you listen to the podcast. So without any further ado, I'd like to introduce Natalie Polakowski. Well, we'll let her tell us a little bit about herself, and then we'll talk about art therapy. Well, hi, Natalie. Thanks for joining us.
Hello there. Absolutely happy to be here.
Tell us and our listeners a little bit about yourself and how you came to be in the field of art therapy.
Absolutely. So my initial interest in art started when I was very much a small child, and I would sit in front of the TV and watch movies with my grandpa and make art, and that was kind of like my go-to outlet, something that I could do in times of stress or at times that I needed just to kind of release energy, whether that be, good or negative energy. And it's something that I kind of did in private. I didn't really, take a lot of art classes in high school. And finally, towards the end of high school, I was just like, I should pursue this. This is what makes me happy. This is something I'm passionate about. And so I decided to go to Central Michigan University and pursue fine arts. And so I kind of put everything on the line and was like, I'm going to go for it. And I pursued two-dimensional design with a concentration in printmaking. And the whole time I was, doing this program, I was putting my whole heart and soul into the work I was making, and just the process that's involved in printmaking, especially, is very therapeutic. And so what I didn't realize, because I really didn't know what art therapy was during my undergraduate degree, was that I was doing kind of engaging in self-art therapy or self-care, if you will. And so towards the end of my program, my undergraduate program, I decided to do some more research because I knew that I wanted to extend and kind of continue on with my education. And I actually happened upon art therapy when I went to a printmaking conference in San Francisco, California. And I spoke to a few art therapists, and I was just like, what is this? Like, it's a combination of kind of psychology and art and just, helping people and just things that I loved combined and meshing together. And so I did some research, and I found that, there was a program, the only program in Michigan, it was through Wayne State University. And so I was like, you know what, throw caution to the wind, I'm just going to pursue this. I did speak to a couple of other professors that had known about it and were able to tell me a little bit more about what this was and what I would be doing and things like that. And so I applied for the program at Wayne State in 2014 after I graduated from Central Michigan. Got accepted, I was ecstatic, and I just recently finished my master's program. So it's a master's of education with a concentration in art therapy. And actually, Wayne State offers two different avenues. There's Master of Education with a concentration in art therapy, and then there's a Master of Counseling with art therapy concentration. And so there's kind of two different avenues. I stuck with the Master of Education art therapy concentration, and that's more or less like working in schools and certainly private practices, but it's a lot of group art therapy, which I really like, and I kind of was engaged with all throughout my master's program. As I said, I graduated in May 2018, so just a couple months ago. And so now I still work at my full-time job is I'm in insurance. I work in insurance, so I'm a supervisor for a business casualty team there. And I'm kind of an art therapist by night, but I'm hoping to switch those gears, in the near future. But really, I'm so ecstatic to be where I'm at right now. Right now I'm an art therapist at the Samaritan Counseling Center in Farmington Hills. And so I run adult group art therapy in the evenings. And kind of how I got there is, I guess, a journey in and of itself. So if it's okay with you, I'll touch on that.
Well, let's let me come back to that for just a second. I want to follow up on something you said, and then I'll let you continue. But okay. So you started with an eye toward a fine arts degree, and then found out about art therapy. How would you, just to the sort of the casual listener like me, how would you define the difference? What was the difference in the curriculum between a fine arts track and an art therapy track?
Sure. So the fine arts kind of route was more like technique classes and art history classes and kind of mastering a concentration, whether that be two-dimensional design or sculpture or graphic design. Whereas art therapy, there is some studio art involved, like drawing, painting, sculpture, but it's more or less like the creative process and kind of psychological development, learning how to run groups, how to administer art therapy assessments, even just like extended research methods, and even a multicultural diversity piece, which I really enjoyed. So it's a lot more honed in on art as therapy or using art in therapy practices.
This is maybe a silly question, but you're obviously a talented artist, but how important is that skill in art therapy relative to the other skills of empathy and compassion and all of that?
It's definitely helpful. I think there was a lot of people within my cohort who had never had art experience, like actually them having drawing skills and things like that. But I find it helpful because, especially when I worked with children, being able to help them kind of draw something that they can't or kind of guide them in a certain way, and certainly knowing the medium that you're working with, whether it be painting or play, it kind of gives me, I think, or anyone with artistic skills, a leg up in the field because you're able to guide the clients along the way, of their journey through art therapy.
Do you have a medium that you specialize in?
My undergraduate was in printmaking, and so that's kind of like an archaic method of making multiples, if you will. So my specialty was intaglio, which is basically etching into copper and making multiples by running it through like a printing press. That's not as easy to do in an art therapy setting, just as far as resources and things like that. So once I graduated from Central Michigan, I kind of shifted my area of interest to watercolors, and so that's something I really try to implement within my art therapy process. And it really does depend, the group you're working with, the client you're working with, what their needs are. Some clients don't really like the fluidity of watercolor, and they kind of like to be in a little bit more of control. But I would say that that's kind of more my forte now.
Let's. I do want to eventually get into the different types of populations that art therapy might benefit. But let's go back. I interrupted you on your journey. So we're May of 2018. You're graduating from Wayne State. Where did you go from there? Was there an internship that you were involved with, or anything along those lines?
Yes. So the first kind of like real world taste of art therapy that I got was actually through my practicum through Wayne State University. So they have something called a Saturday Art Therapy Fall Workshop. And essentially it's a 10-week workshop for children and adults, and a practicum experience for the graduate art therapy students. But the program is basically for any any adult or child within Metro Detroit area that wants to sign up for this group to come every Saturday for 10 weeks. It's $25 a participant for the 10 weeks in total. And so it's split up into a children's group, an adult group, and an awesome autism group. And so you kind of rank them, which one you'd like to get most experience in. And I had put children first, and I got placed in the adult group, which I was still very excited about it because I had never even had an experience really with working one-on-one or in a group setting using art therapy. So I got placed in the adult group. And so I was with 3 other students in my cohort with art therapy, and we had to come up with a 10-week art therapy program, kind of just more generalized art therapy. There are populations that you do specific directives or experientials with, but this is more like a generalized, program, kind of like just self-care and things of that nature. And so that was my first experience actually utilizing art therapy, even just in a group setting. And then from there, I was placed in an internship, and that was actually with Samaritan Counseling Center, which is my current employer. And I was I was brought on as an intern to do art therapy groups within the Walled Lake Consolidated School System. And so I serviced 3 different schools there, and I would go there once a week, and it was also a 10-week group. And the purpose of this program essentially was to kind of use art as a way to build self-confidence in children, and kind of have them become aware of themselves and build resiliency and even just kind of bravery amongst themselves, and to empower themselves and empower each other. In this particular group, it wasn't just random kids. It was students who were struggling in school or struggling at home and kind of needed an outlet. A lot of them were getting in trouble in school and just needed some kind of guidance. And this was kind of like a safe place for them. It was 1 hour a week that they could come. It was called Art Adventures, the program. So 1 week that they could come to Art Adventures and just kind of release and be themselves and express themselves through art.
Did they opt into that? Were they referred by school staff or their parents into that program?
So they were referred either by their students, either by the principal or their teachers or their parents. So it wasn't necessarily a volunteered thing. It was something that they were referred to. And
so just talk me through it. How does that work? You go in and there's this group of students. First of all, how many would be in a typical group, and how long was the group, and how did it work? How much time was actually spent doing art? How much time was spent talking? Just kind of take me through what a typical session would be like.
Absolutely. So unfortunately, I only got 1 hour a week with them, which to me, I wish I could have been there every day. And some of the children even expressed that they wish they could do this every day. So I would come in. I had an hour with them. and let's say we're like in the middle of the 10-week session. So I would come in, we would kind of, talk for 10 minutes and just see, what was going on, in their week or in their day, what was new for them, something of concern. And then a lot of times, like, they had a lot of shared concerns, like a lot of them had anxiety or were feeling, bullied at school. And so a lot of the directives that we were doing were based around that, or at least, trying to like bring them up from that. And so actually I can explain one of the experientials I did with them. So we made treasure boxes one week, and it was essentially to help the students identify their good qualities and to help them appreciate them and quote unquote treasure them. And so, a lot of these kids were, like I said, always getting in trouble, or, someone was always reprimanding them. And the purpose of this group essentially was to let them be themselves and not reprimand them, but kind of just redirect them in a positive way, because they're so used to hearing negative, negative, negative all the time. So along with the treasure boxes, what I would have them do is they would write down good positive characteristics about themselves. And then they would choose, 4 or 5 of these words, cut them out, paste them inside of like a 3-dimensional, kind of handheld wooden box, like treasure box that you get at like Michael's or something like that. And then I would have them share these qualities with each other. And, a lot of times they would have similar qualities, and they would just kind of bond over that. And, this is how, I do this and you do this. And, we're actually kind of very similar people. And after they did that, after they pasted the picture, after they pasted the words into the box, they would go ahead and decorate the treasure box and make it their own and put jewels on it. And while they were doing that, I would bring around a piece of treasure that they could put inside their box, and I would give them a positive affirmation, kind of giving them another, positive characteristic that they have. So just hearing that from someone else, it's just super validating, and they would just light up. So I guess that would be like an instance of what a typical session would be. But quite possibly my favorite part of the program, at the end of each session, I would give each student a little pom-pom, like a different colored pom-pom. It's like a handheld kind of fuzzy ball, and I called them warm fuzzies. And so these warm fuzzies I would give to each student, and regardless if they earned it or not, I would find something positive to say about them in that session, even if it was them having their worst day. Just something positive that they did or said, or something about the work that they made. So each student would leave each of the sessions with a warm fuzzy and something that they could take with them, kind of like a transitional object that would remind them about that positive thing that they did or said.
When they would talk about their anxiety or whatever issue they may have, would you engage with them in that conversation? Were you sort of a conversational therapist as well as an art therapist? Are there lines that you don't cross? I guess I'm a little curious about the role of art therapist versus, for lack of a better term, a conversational therapist.
Sure. So certainly when these issues would come up, or these concerns would come up, there are like generally 6 to 8 students in the group. So while they're working and they're making whatever they're doing, I would try to sit down with each student and kind of touch on a little bit further what they were concerned about. And a lot of times it was things going on at home or in school, and just for them to be able to kind of vent and get that out, and even just kind of a little bit of psychoeducation. So things that I could offer to them. What if you tried this studying habit? So it's not just like sitting down like with a therapist and saying, this is what's going on and things like that. It's kind of integrating the art into those conversations, but also having those psychoeducational conversations with the students.
So these were high school kids?
No, these were grade school. So this was I saw third graders, fourth graders, and fifth graders.
Oh, third, fourth, fifth. What other? You mentioned that you have worked with other populations. What other types of populations have you worked with?
So I actually just got done with my first official group at Samaritan Counseling Center, not as an intern. So I came up with a program proposal for Samaritan Counseling Center, and this is actually the reason I got hired into this position. But it was a 10-week program also for adults who were just seeking alternative methods of maintaining self-care. So every day we're dealing with stressors and anxiety of just work and home and just personal things, and we don't take time for ourselves just to kind of unwind and decompress. And so I came up with this program all based around self-care and different components of self-care, just to kind of encourage people to take part in the journey of self-exploration and self-care. And so, as I said, I just finished up with that, but each week was a different component of self-care, and so each week we came in, we spoke. I did have an hour and a half with them each week, which was nice, and I had 6 participants. And so each week we would come in, we would talk, and then we would kind of segue into what the directive was for that week. And in addition, I gave them journals so that they could do ongoing journaling, whether that be writing or drawing, and just something that they could hold on to and also continue on after the program finished up. So it was a great response, and I'm going to be running the same group in the fall, so I'm looking forward to that as well.
Were these folks self-referred? Were they referred? Yes, okay. Were they part of an overall counseling program, or was this sort of a standalone art therapy approach?
This is kind of a standalone art therapy. There were a couple participants that did, they did have individual counseling sessions and things of that nature, but not with me. So this was kind of a standalone on the side offered through Samaritan Counseling Center for anyone in the community that was looking to engage in art therapy.
On a more general topic, what are other populations? I would imagine that art therapy would have great uses for a population that may have PTSD, for example, or depression. You mentioned autism. I'm also wondering if this is if something that might be very useful with a population that has dementia or Alzheimer's. What does your experience tell you about those types of populations?
It's so much, honestly. Art therapy can be applied to anyone. You mentioned PTSD, so using art can kind of help people who are suffering from PTSD or any type of trauma kind of access their stored memory in a safe way, and they're able to kind of release those memories in like I said, in a safe way, and kind of maybe have a reconnection with themselves, and just kind of be able to self-regulate and become aware of what's going on or what's happening when when they're being triggered or things like that. And a great experiential for that would be doing a body map. And so, and this can be done in any capacity, but let's say I'm working with someone who has PTSD. Kind of very, very early on in the process, I would have them do something where kind of like a body scan. And so it would be like a guided meditation where they would kind of go through each part of their body and where they're feeling this stress, where they're feeling this tension, and then they would translate that onto paper. And so I could either give them an outline of a body, or they could do a full outline of their own body, and they would choose colors and associate those with different emotions and feelings that they are experiencing, and then they would map that out within their body. So using, let's say, for instance, blue represented sadness, and colors can represent different things for different people, which is great. That they would essentially make a key, with these different colors. So again, blue, sadness, and maybe they're feeling sad in their heart. So they would make some type of blue design near or right at the place of their heart. Maybe that sadness flows, through their brain, and so they would do different kind of designs and things to represent that with each color. If that makes sense.
Oh, that's fascinating to me. What about what about some other populations? So you mentioned, I think, early on, folks who are on the autism spectrum. How do you see art therapy being helpful there?
Especially with autism, it definitely helps the ability to kind of manage sensory issues. That's definitely a concern within that population, like just having sensory issues, or even kind of helping with motor skills, or even to help them just like with imagination skills. And this is not something that I have done, but I did have someone in my cohort that worked specifically with an autism group. And what they did, when I thought this was so fascinating, was they combined half shaving cream and half Elmer's glue, and with some type of like acrylic paint, and you mix it up, and it becomes a very like cloud-like substance. And that's to kind of help with sensory issues and getting them comfortable with it, and doing like a little bit of a test area first. Like if they don't like the feel of it, maybe they can put gloves on so that they can still participate and feel welcomed into this group and things of that nature. But so they would take the half shaving cream and half Elmer's glue with a little bit of paint, mix it up, and then they would kind of make swirling images on the paper. And then when you let it dry, it actually dries kind of three-dimensional like it is a cloud. And it's very soft to the touch, and so it's something that they can take with them, and it's very like it's a tactile procedure, and that's something that works very well with the autism population.
Again, that's just fascinating. I'm sure there's different approaches for all different types of populations, and I suppose we could talk about all types of different ones. But the one that I have a particular interest in would be dementia or Alzheimer's patients. What does your education tell you about that population?
Definitely, it boosts like cognitive function and stimulates brain function. They're losing different parts of their memory and things like that. But they can use art to kind of re-access certain memories, and maybe they're engaging in some type of painting, and it was an abstract painting, and they see an image, and it kind of emerges for them, and then it triggers something that reminds them of a story or a memory they had with their child or their spouse or something like that. So it really it helps you access a different part of your brain, and it brings out maybe either suppressed or even just lost memories, if you will.
Ah, that's terrific. That is just terrific. I want to back up a little bit though, and talk about art therapy as a career. In some of the maybe obstacles there. You mentioned that you work for what I assume is a private counseling agency.
So it's actually a nonprofit interfaith counseling center.
Okay. How are your services paid for? And is that a barrier to folks receiving your services?
Do you mean my services in particular, like art therapy?
Yeah, sort of art therapy. Maybe your agency in general, but art therapy specifically. Is that something that is covered by a third party insurance, for example, or is that something that is generally private pay? And is that an obstacle to people receiving your services?
I think with our services in general, we do accept insurance, not all insurance. I don't deal with that specifically with my particular groups that I'm running, and this is actually kind of a segue into one of the obstacles. So Michigan itself is not actually a protected licensed state. So every single state, like there's certain states that are, but Michigan itself is not, and so there's not I couldn't just practice art therapy with under an art therapy license, because that does not exist. and so it essentially has to be tied to another type of mental health insurance, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that's okay. That's interesting. So you said Michigan is not you called it a protected license state.
Correct.
What does that mean?
So some states offer like an art therapy license or allow art therapists to become licensed under a related mental health profession. And Michigan, unfortunately, offers neither at this time. But there are efforts being made to kind of bring this full circle. And there's actually, funny enough, very recently, there was a bill that was being introduced to the Michigan House of Representatives, actually I think just at the beginning of June, to kind of get this, going, and hopefully it passes. So that we're on our way to that, so we're getting baby steps to that spot. But at this time, it just means protected license, meaning like we're not able to practice like under an art therapy license. It has to be attached to another profession, if that makes sense. So Samaritan Counseling Center offers counseling services. So, like, for instance, my supervisor, she is a licensed counselor, but she's also a licensed art therapist. So she integrates art therapy into her practice, but she is not just practicing under an art therapy license.
Understood. But there are other states wherein you could practice under an art therapy license.
Exactly. So I think that there's only 7 states with an actual art therapy license. So I know Kentucky is one of them, Oregon is one of them, New Mexico. I can't think of the other ones offhand. And then there's states where art therapy is recognized, for hiring and for title protection, and there's only a few of those. But so Michigan is one that is waiting to obtain this licensure. So it's not that we can't practice art therapy, but it just can't be, singular, just art therapy alone.
This may be a bit of an unfair question, but what do you think is misunderstood about what you do? When you're out in the world living your life and you tell people what you do, what do you think they misunderstand?
A lot of times when I mention art therapy, I would say majority of people are like, what is that? Like, I've never heard of that. Or they'll say, oh, is that like Rorschach drawings, or are you holding up drawings and asking clients what they see? So that's definitely probably one of the main ones that I hear. And then, on that token, I then explain to them, no, it's actually clients engaging in art and kind of having a conversation with themselves. And really the art therapist's job is to just kind of guide them along the way, like finding themselves and working through, whatever they're dealing with. And I guess another big misconception is that, you see all these like coloring books, adult coloring books in Walmart, or there's art therapy apps, for Android and Apple, and those aren't necessarily like accredited art therapy things. Like certainly coloring and doing art therapy stuff on art therapy apps can be therapeutic, but it's not necessarily art therapy. Like people who study and go to school for art therapy, like there's a lot of work that goes into it and a lot of studying, a lot of research. And it's not to say that those things like the coloring books and the apps are bad, but it's almost like a slap in the face to those who have studied and have worked hard for their master's degree or their doctorate in art therapy. So, on occasion there'll be services, even just like occupational therapists and who advertise art therapy services, and it's a little bit inaccurate for them to use the term just because it has to be practiced by an individual who either possesses the training, the certification, or the state licensure to practice art therapy.
What do you wish people knew about what you do?
I guess just like my firsthand experience and the impact it makes, like especially with the kids I was working with, like being able to see them progress through the 10 weeks and really come into their own and just get excited about not only just making art, but about talking about how they're feeling, because I think a lot of times that's such a taboo thing, just in general, talking about how you're feeling, and being able to do that and have them open up with each other and almost create a little, like, group in and of themselves. Like I had one group, there was actually 10 kids in this one. It was a little bit full, and it was just myself. But I remember distinctly one of the students, our very last session, was like, hey, like, we should continue to do art therapy together. Like, let's do art adventures as a group, even though this program's over with. And this was coming from, you know, a sixth grader boy, and I was just like, wow, like, this is so cool to see the impact that it bonded them, and it created, again, resiliency within themselves, and just to be able to put everything out there in a different way rather than just talking about it, especially with, like, you know, sixth grade boys. Like, they probably would never want to open up about, you know, what's going on. And so just for people to know that impact, even if it is, you know, small at this point, you know, I would love to see art therapy being utilized in every school, because it truly is just a great outlet for students. And I think what's nice too is, you know, the school psychologist or the school social worker could probably work, you know, hand in hand with that art therapist, and they could, you know, really help these kids get through life and get through school. And it's just it's a hard thing, life, obviously for anyone, but for kids, I feel they need that guidance, and they need those resources.
Do you have any idea, you may not, but do you have any idea how many schools have art therapy programs? What percentage?
I honestly don't. I know in the Metro Detroit area, you know, there's a lot of inner city schools have art therapy programs, but to my knowledge, the only other one that I know of is the Walt Lake school system. And I know that when I left the internship, they were expanding to other schools within the district alone, because there was only, like I said, 3, maybe 4 schools that were being offered these services. But what was great about this, and I think this might be, you know, one of the roadblocks, is there was actually a nonprofit organization that it was able to fund this program, and so that was called LAYA, which was Lakes Area Youth Assistance. And so I don't think every district has that, you know, type of funding or type of programs that they're able to offer. So I think that's a huge component of why most schools don't have this program.
Yeah, unfortunately, that's the reality. And when you mentioned school psychologists and school counselors, that was my thought. I think that would be great, but there's such budgetary constraints that it's just not as possible as you probably would like it to be. I was going to ask you, Natalie, what you would tell a high school junior or a high school senior who was heading off to college and was considering studying art therapy, whether or not you would tell them to do it. But I can just tell from the enthusiasm in your voice, I think you would absolutely be behind them and pushing them toward a career in art therapy. I can tell that you see it as a worthwhile adventure.
Absolutely. You know, when I was at Central Michigan University, I was involved in a group called College 101, and what the program's, you know, kind of purpose was to bring students who were at risk of, you know, dropping out of school or, you know, getting involved in gang violence and things like that. We brought these kids to Central Michigan, not to promote Central as a school, but to promote college as a whole, and just how you can get there. And, you know, there are obstacles, but we made it, you know, we showed them how it is possible. And, you know, most of these kids were very artistic, either with their voice or their lyrics, or they would have like a journal with them that they were doing these drawings, and they had no idea that they could make this a career. And so even now, like, you know, I was doing fine arts at the time when I was participating with this College 101, but now looking back, I wish I could even just like go back and tell these kids, like, you know, I did pursue art, but I even took it a step further, and I pursued 2 of my passions, which is helping people and art together. And so it doesn't even just stop at college. Like, there's so much to learn and there's so much to grow from, not only from just education, but just from the people and your, the peers that you have around you. So absolutely, I would definitely recommend a program similar to this.
One of the related things that I'm interested in and hope to do a podcast on in the near future is music as therapy.
Very interesting.
Were there sort of programs at either Central Michigan or Wayne State that had music as therapy as a focus?
I'm not honestly sure about that. I don't know that it's like an actual program like art therapy, but I would assume that somewhere in the country that there is a music therapy program, because I mean that's something that's certainly offered in like hospital settings and mental health, outpatient settings and things like that. So I don't know that it's offered at Wayne State, but I would assume that somewhere locally it would be.
Let me wrap this up with a two-part question.
Okay.
What is your hope for your future in the field of art therapy? Your specific goals and plans, and then art therapy as a profession. What do you hope to see happen in the world of art therapy going forward?
Okay. For the first question, I guess for myself, I would love to pursue art therapy full time. So at this time, like I had mentioned, I'm just working part time and running, groups here and there. But I would love, to work for like an art therapy facility if there were one. Maybe that will be my goal. To get a band of art therapists together and even counselors who have art therapy as a background too together, to where we could have like this center, this hub of just, even just creative services, not necessarily just art therapy. It could offer music services or theatrical therapy. There is such thing as that too, which I thought is very, very interesting. So again, I would like to pursue art therapy full time and, maybe become more involved in the community even and bringing people together to educate them on what art therapy is and the benefits of art therapy, and just how it can improve, people's quality of life and improve their mental, emotional, physical states. So yeah, I mean, that might be something of the future, but that's my goal with art therapy. And then as far as art therapy as a whole, certainly I would love to see all 50 states with that protected license and just, I guess, more prevalent in the community. Like I said, it is offered in hospitals and schools and, community clinics, but just more of it, just something. So when it is talked about, that people aren't like, oh, what's that? Like, I've never heard of that. Like, it has been around for a long time, but it's just something that has been so niche that people don't really know what it is. So I would love it for it to be just huge and everyone knows what art therapy is.
Natalie, I this was great. I very much enjoyed talking to you. I'm sure that the folks who listen to this are going to learn an awful lot. And your passion really comes through, and it's hard not to find that contagious. So thanks for taking the time to talk to us, and best of luck to you.
Thank you.
Once again, my guest has been Natalie Polakowski. What a great conversation that was. I just really enjoyed her passion and enthusiasm for what she does. I hope to include her on future podcasts. Thank you for listening. Feel free to send any comments you have to me, my email address, jim@adeincorp.com. I'm happy to hear from you. And as always, if you have suggestions for any future podcasts, please let us know. We'd love to hear from you. Thanks for listening to this episode of the ADE Spotlight podcast. If you would like to be a guest on one of our podcasts, or if you have an idea for a topic you'd like us to cover, please feel free to drop us a line. We'd love to hear your suggestions. If you haven't done so already, I encourage you to check out ADE Solutions, a new website from ADE. There you will find a variety of quizzes and assessments covering a whole range of behavioral health related topics, including substance use, gambling, mental health disorders, eating disorders, and the like. If you have concerns about yourself or a loved one in these areas, please access the website and check out the assessments. Or if you simply want to expand your knowledge on these topics, on the education tab on that website, we have a variety of quizzes as well as other podcasts similar to the one that you just listened to. You can find that at www.ade.solutions, or you can link to it from our corporate website, www.adeincorp.com.